Hi Phoebe, how you doing? Thank you so much for submitting your work here. Yes, it is definitely more challenging than the banana assignment because now we not only have individual spaces between letters, but we have spaces between words. So there's a lot more to consider. On top of that, we're using a serif typeface, which makes things a little bit trickier in a proper word spacing. So let's go ahead and take a look at your work, which I have up right. I've got this up, and I want to open something else up in conjunction with your file so we can take a look at them together. The top example is something I've done digitally in, I did this in Illustrator. Exact same principles in InDesign for spacing, but I consider this to be perfect word and letter spacing for the phrase fire and ice. And one of the things that we want to establish here is good, consistent letter spacing so that the mind is able to perceive this statement as exactly that one statement, as opposed to a series of words. Every time there's a unnecessary break on a page, and this is a general uh, uh, statement for all of graphic design. If there's a break somewhere, an unnecessary space, the mind keys in on that space. And the reason is because our mind is continuously trying to organize what it sees. So what we're doing is we're trying to create groups, and the groups that we create allow the mind to make more sense of what we're seeing. So for example, if we see optimal letter spacing, this would be, and word spacing, phrase would be considered one group. And we can see that in the top example. Fire and ice is very, very legible as one group. So we don't even have to stop to sound out the letters or the words. We're able to look at this at a glance and see fire and ice. Now we have a little bit of a different situation down here in word spacing. Now we talked about kerning or letter spacing last week. This week we're adding word spacing into the mix. Now we can see right here, this example right here, there's a large space. This space between fire and is larger than the space between and ice. Therefore, the mind perceives this as a larger space, perceives this as something that should be given more of a break. So what subsequently happens is we view this as fire and ice, as opposed to fire and ice. Conversely, if there would be a wider space right here, our mind would see fire and ice. So our mind is breaking where you tell it to break, right? So keep that in mind in your letter spacing. Okay, as far as, I'm sorry, in your word spacing now, as far as letter spacing goes, I think the word fire is kerned beautifully. I think the word and is also kerned very well. You're kerning your individual letter spacing. I think it's done very, very well. It's the letter spacing, it's the word spacing that I'm having a little bit more of an issue. So again, to repeat that more clearly, your letter spacing seems to be done very well. It's the word spacing that's somewhat problematic. I think in general, the spaces between all three words are too great. And also this space is larger than this space, which adds that, kind of separates the word fire and keeps it off by itself. I think the main problem that we're having here is, and I'm going to just take this and I want to use this as a straight edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this over, and I want to use the top of this as a straight edge. Okay, and I'm going to place it underneath the baseline for the word and. And I'm going to stretch this out, and let's go ahead and see what happens. We can see that the word and doesn't sit evenly on the baseline like we see here. And we can see the word ice also it's not even. The word fire isn't even on the baseline, it's above the baseline. So there's some extreme inconsistencies. If I pull this straight edge away, we can reveal and see the fact that there is no baseline drawn here. I think the most important thing to do in this assignment is to draw that baseline first, get that level baseline. Once that baseline is level, you can use it as a foundation. It kind of acts like a foundation for a house, where if this side of the house is uneven from this side of the house, the whole thing is going to be uneven, right? So we want to establish a good, solid, level baseline first, and then we'll start assembling our letters on that baseline. Once you start assembling some of the lowercase letters, you'll be able to establish the mean line. And then, of course, you'll be able to establish the cap line as well. All three of those should be depicted in your sketches. So please make sure that you include the baseline, mean line, and cap line in your final presentation too at the end of the week. Um, and that's the main thing here, because right now this is on a different baseline than this. Also, this seems to be not level. As we can see, it's kind of going uphill a little bit. It starts lower here and then kind of moves on a diagonal this way. So the main thing at this point really is the letters, the word spacing itself, as well as your craft. I mean, the craft here is we've got a lot of smudges and craft counts in this assignment. We've got some wrinkles over here in the paper, a lot of smudges over here. And mainly, some of your letters are different sizes than others. And again, that points to not establishing a solid baseline, mean line, and cap line. For example, this E is much bigger than the other letters. We can see some inconsistencies in the presentation of the E as well. So this is much more rounded over here than this is here. So we want really extreme consistency in presentation of the individual letter forms. And I think that to a high degree will definitely clean this up, as well as the fact that we need that baseline, mean line, and cap lines to be present completely perfectly level, and each of those lines should be perfectly parallel with one another, as we see in this example. Of course, it's much more difficult to do while tracing than it is to do on the computer, of course, but that's what makes this such a great assignment, is it allows you to get very intimate with the shapes of the letters, thereby becoming very intimate with the counter shapes or the counter forms associated with that particular letter. And that's the negative space, or the shapes that surround the letter, which to a very high degree dictate how versatile that letter is and how that letter can be used in conjunction with other letter combinations. Again, so in summary, let's get that baseline, mean line, cap line down level and parallel. Let's go ahead and, by the way, you can't draw the baseline and then the mean line. The baseline would have to be drawn first, then you would have to trace out a couple of letters and establish the mean line. You can't get the mean line until some of the lowercase letters are in place. That's a critical point, and I'll be glad to clarify that if need be. If that statement doesn't make sense to you, get with me quickly and I'll clarify that. But again, the baseline, the mean line can't be drawn without letters in place, of course, because the mean line is the line that connects the tops of the lowercase letters. Okay, so those are my recommendations. Again, letter spacing seems to be done very well. Word spacing needs some adjustments. You want those spaces to appear to have the same volume, okay? And then, of course, craft is really compromised in this situation. So we really want to clean this up and get everything on a level baseline. Make sure all of your serifs are extremely consistent in their presentation. Make sure all those letters are the same size. All right. Any questions at all, please let me know. Great start. Thank you very much for sharing.